One of my fondest memories from my early days in FF14 is a simple one. In A Realm Reborn and Heavensward, a lot of the quality of life that exists today just simply wasn't a thing, even down to the capability to directly queue into raid content via the duty finder. Back then you had to manually travel to the entrance of the raid itself in order to enter. In the case of Alexander, your party would fly out into the Dravanian hinterlands and make their way to that huge mechanized structure, venturing onto the tiny island that linked the outside world to the Primal's outstretched hand. Whilst doing so could be considered an unnecessary inconvenience, I looked forward to it every week. The entrance to the raid became a pseudo-social hub, and you'd always see a collection of players outside, some going into or coming out of their own static raids, and others there to cheer people on and chat with one another. Over time, you'd come to know the other groups on your server naturally by virtue of this connection point. I was there to cheer on a handful of groups as they cleared Living Liquid for the first time, emerging victorious and lighting up SayChat with their proud exclamations. Similarly, others would congratulate me on my clears and notice if I attained a new piece of loot. It felt like a community. That leads me to my question, and the topic of today's video. Has Final Fantasy XIV become less social over time? Are we more isolated than before on our singular journeys through Eorzea, or is it a perspective issue? More than that, what is the toss-up in the paradigm between quality of life and immersion, and are MMOs in general making a shift away from the latter in order to keep with the times? There's going to be a bit of yapping today, basically. The first, and by far most harped on about on message boards and social media, is the relative lack of incentivization that players have to spend much of their time at all in the outside world in FF14 compared to other MMO games. Each expansion is accompanied by a range of new zones, and they are mostly gorgeous, broad in colour palette, theme, and inhabited by a diverse spectrum of wildlife, friendly races, and dangerous foes alike. They're good, and they generally do a lot of justice to making the world look like it houses depths to keep players engaged. Look being the key word here, because unfortunately, aside from a handful of niche instances, practically all of these zones are devoid of any interesting reason to ever return after the initial main story run-through has been completed. You'll follow a dozen or so quests from point A to point B, watching cutscenes along the way, inevitably walk to an instance dungeon or trial at the end, and then never come back. Those exceptions include side quests that mimic the initial point A to point B, Beast Tribe dailies released months after the fact, fate grinding, and hunts. You'd expect that at least the last two, fates and hunts, would be a fantastic way to have players natively grouping and collaborating with one another, to make them interact in meaningful ways, talk and have fun, to bring the world to life. But unfortunately, it rarely happens because of the nature of their designs. Hunts are all about speed. Players will set up trains to speedrun them as efficiently as possible, and for all intents and purposes, their usual gameplay loop resultingly is to throw 3 to 5 GCDs at a mob, teleport to the next one, hope you get there in time, and repeat for 30 minutes. It's fast enough that there's rarely enough time to engage with both the content and the party, and boring enough that there isn't much reason to want to in the first place. Unless you are one of those astronomically few that are undertaking the effort to build a community to scout the hunts themselves for these trains, it is transient and forgettable. Fates are clearly intended to fill that role, having been heavily marketed when A Realm Reborn first released as being dynamic, open-world events that appear throughout Eorzea, to use Square Enix's messaging, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Once you've done 4 or so fates, you've done them all, and due to their repetitive kill trash mob nature and relative lack of any meaningful reward, they are flavourless junk food, both immediately forgotten and in desperate need of supplement by far more interesting second monitor content to make them palatable. Recently, I've been playing Guild Wars 2, and that game has a system that for most intents and purposes is a one-for-one transplant of the Fate system, but they do it a lot better, I think. Objectives are far more diverse. ArenaNet weren't afraid to have escort quests or area protection quests or even sieges of strongholds directly using the system, even at the risk of them being considered suboptimal or obtuse. World maps are littered with points of interest and things to do, and when I reach a new one, I'm always excited to spend the next 2 hours exploring its every crevice before even considering interacting with the plot that took me there in the first place. More than that, the timed events were just really rewarding. The first one I found natively was this big pirate encampment, and the only reason I knew it was coming was because of the host of players waiting outside, having set up buffs and crafting stations for the less fortunate such as myself to use. There was chatter, a number of people waved at me as I arrived, and the excitement was palpable. What followed was a multi-step encounter. Trash mobs, then an objective, followed by a 2-stage boss battle that took about 10 to 15 minutes all in all. The mechanics were as simple as dodge AoE, but it felt like a proper siege as we destroyed the gate and barreled inside to chase down the captain, and at the end a huge chest dropped, providing me loot in the form of a nice little upgrade and some rare materials. I felt like the time I had invested was worth it, and I had felt that the world was alive. The players around me didn't zoom off to the next hunt after a 10-second battle, nor did they wordlessly ignore me. I felt like part of the community. In FF14, the world doesn't feel lived in, and it doesn't feel like people live within it. It is a means to an end. I've often called relic quests the great funnel in FF14, at least by intent, a series of quests that take effort and time both to complete, with a prize worth the investment to obtain, either for glamour or for the prestige of owning what will end up becoming the strongest weapon by the end of the expansion. Hardcore players, casual players, the new and old, and everybody in between alike are brought together. They come from all walks of life through the same tunnel of experience in the relic quest, and it is in theory an excellent way to get them interacting and being social with one another. I have good memories from this exact scenario coming to fruition in my completions of Eureka, Bozja, and the Heavensward Anima Relic. But in Endwalker, that same boon was seemingly forgotten in favour of a passive tombstone completion. And in Dawntrail, the new field operation Occult Crescent is seemingly designed intentionally to be as optimal and self-sufficient as possible so that players won't have to interact with one another. They won't be forced to take any downtime to socialise. All of that is to say, these newer iterations, and most of FF14's design, is built with the primary goal of convenience at all cost. In this case, I firmly believe that this convenience does come at a cost, the cost of both immersion and social interaction. Every major duty or piece of bespoke content intended to hold your interest in game nowadays is accessed through a menu. It's extremely convenient. If you need to access a raid, you open the menu and queue in, and once the party fills, will be automatically matched with a group that shares both your goal and fills the other required jobs in the party. The same goes for dungeons, trials, alliance raids. The system over time got expanded upon for more current content in the raid finder, and the duty finder expanded its usage. You don't need to recruit members, ask your friends, or make new ones. Building connections is unnecessary. Of course, these features are expected, and I'm not by any means asking for them to be removed, but they do serve secondarily to anesthetize social interaction in a world that is already starving for it. MMOs are about the shared journey, the lived-in world, and when most of your time within the world is spent traversing menus from one instanced boss to the next, with faceless allies each time, something is lost. The world is no longer a place. Cross-server travel and Party Finder being added was a huge boon to expand the pool of players one could interact with, and I generally consider it a positive. But the thorn within the rose was the crippling of individual server identities. Previously, it was a lot easier to both become and to recognize a local. Your server was your home, and if you spent enough time within it, you'd see the same faces again and again. You'd recognize that guy that liked to stand on the big rock in Idleshire, the people that were farming their extreme every day for a mount that would inevitably never drop for them, and those that popped into random PFs to help people, regardless of which duty it was for. Limitation helped to strengthen identity. Nowadays the possibilities are wider, but it's like you're wearing blackout windows. The people are faceless. To make it clear, I'm not saying any of these additions were a net negative for the game. They weren't, they were categorically a net positive. But what they secondarily served to do was to expose some gaping flaws and gaps that already existed in the nature of the MMORPG. Those weaknesses shine much more clearly when the experience is streamlined to just its heart. To me, MMOs are all about the journey, together. That together being the friends you find along the way through your organic experiences with randoms that become your friends, family that becomes found. If the world traversal doesn't incentivize you to explore it, or to have interactions with others that create memories, if it's too sterile, all of that is of major concern to me. Now don't get me wrong, this is not exclusively an FF14 problem. The very nature of online and live service games have shifted dramatically since the early 2010s when it first released. The advent of games like Apex Legends and Fortnite have had significant knock-on effects to other live service genres. In those games, the transient nature of the world is seen as not being a negative, but if anything, a boon. They are designed to be bite-size, drop in and drop out matches for a quick fix of dopamine to more efficiently serve the lifestyles of today. They are supposed to be snackable. If you have only an hour or 30 minutes to play, the intent is that you can log on and do something productive, and log off without experiencing any major FOMO. The days of needing to live in the world, for it to feel lived in, are coming to an end. In these games, the player unlocks and their personal progress is persistent, and the world around them ever-changing. Cosmetics, battle passes, and limited duration live events. FF14 has clearly made strides to trend in that direction as well. The seasonal battle pass on their PvP reward track, an ever-increasing shift to instance-based battle content that outside of progression is intended to be consumed in bite-sized 10 to 20 minute chunks, with random players in mind, and an avoidance of requiring players to remain in the world for any reason aside from those chunks that they consume. It's a shift that is seemingly taking place in their main competitor, World of Warcraft, as well. You return with the new season or patch to check out what's changed. You come back with the 0.5 patch and otherwise move on to other things. Eorzea is a place you visit, rather than the home from which you set forth. Retention goals and expectations are just different now, as the industry speeds up its cadence in digesting and moving on from new experiences. They need to be spectator-friendly, short session durations and clippable for maximum virality. A slow-paced, persistent world with obligations and shared history is just too much to deal with in comparison. That's partly why I feel like the genre is in decline, as its player base ages out. Of course, I do have to admit that this feeling is in part my own fault. It's all too easy to get comfortable with your own existence. There are social hubs, RP events and parties, and ways that if you push outside of your own circle, you can still build connections. The nature of them has changed, and the fact that the onus has moved onto the player-driven nature of them rather than them being the natural order of things. But if you look for them, they do still exist. But for me, I still look back at the way things were before, all those years ago, with a faint sense of longing. I hope that in the coming years, FF14 is able to foster that sense of community once more, without sacrificing the precious ground they've gained for the sake of convenience. But maybe, really, that's an unrealistic ask. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, I really do appreciate it. I have a Patreon, you don't need to support it, but if you do, it will allow me to keep uploading here more regularly. Patrons got this video early, and the people on screen now are the reason I was able to make this one, and I'm greatly appreciative. I'll have pre-release excerpts for the future videos there, as well as some exclusive content, and you'll be included in the credits of future videos. No pressure, though, and thank you so much, of course, for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.